Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write great fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of the Hand of Adonai series, The Bargain, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, recently of nonfiction fame, 30 events that shaped the church and 60 people who shaped the church before that, and then Wounds is my most recent novel by Broadman Holman. So that's me, and I've been busy with other things too. So
yeah, you're kind of. I think all writers are somewhat jacks of all trades. They've got to have their hands in writing and marketing and a little bit of everything else. Podcasts. Some writers do podcasts. Pops, I don't know if you've heard of this, but they'll do podcasts on writing.
No, never heard of it. I wouldn't do it because I'd have to wear headphones and stuff. So
yeah, and that would just be crazy. So
yeah, I can't rock the headphones. I've been doing a lot of radio interviews, and for those watching and watching later, if you go to my website, altongansky.com, I just posted a short video that I did in studio for a thing called Haven. Haven Today is what it's called, and also there's an audio one I did for ABQ Connect, which is a radio station out of Albuquerque, and I got another one tomorrow, so it's 7:30 in the morning. That'll be a good one.
Wow. You're just making the rounds. Are these for your nonfiction books?
Yeah, it's for my most recent nonfiction book, and it's easier to get radio interviews when you do nonfiction. It's hard for them to, unless you're a bestseller or something, it's hard for radio stations to pick up the novel and be able to make a program out of it. Though I can tell you how to do it.
How's that?
What you do is you make sure that your novel, whatever it is, has some kind of theme to it. I did one, for example, and I labeled the theme "How We Deceive Ourselves." It's a book about deception, and the person that deceives us most, we deceive ourselves the most, and that turned into a kind of a hot topic on the radio stations, and that's the way I was able to get in and get interviews for novels. Nonfiction is different. They do those routinely.
That's interesting. So I just need to rewrite my current work in progress to have a theme that I can market. So.
Well, find a theme in it. There's always something. Finding courage, dealing with misunderstanding. You can find a theme in almost any novel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We've got somebody at the California Writers Club who has done an incredible job marketing her book. And when she was writing it, she did it. She thought of it geographically, and so set her scenes in particular actual towns and cities in Oklahoma, I believe, and then marketed upon publication, marketed the book to those cities and did a book tour and all that kind of stuff, and it's had some pretty incredible sales. So thinking ahead for marketing is never a bad idea. Speaking of which, that's something that you need to do when you are creating proposals. How about that transition?
Yes, and before I do the publishing term for the day, let's say hello to the Romper Room. We see Michelle out there and Mary Ruth Hughes and Dave Fessenden. Do you know him by chance?
I actually was just talking with him today via email.
And Molly Joe's here too. So hello, Room.
Hello, Room.
All right, for the publishing word for the day, it's probably a term that most people know, but I want to make sure that we get it covered. And I'm choosing this because I've spent a good bit of the day working on one of these, and it's called a proposal. Proposal is a term that's used in publishing for the author's effort to sell their book, their idea. And so proposal, both for fiction and nonfiction, is really supposed to be your best writing, but it is what you send into the publisher, and the reason that's done is your agent will either send the proposal in, or if you're doing this over the transom, if you remember our first publishing term when we started this, somehow you got to get the manuscript into the hands of an editor, and so writers' conferences are one way. Over the transom is the least effective way of doing that, and but the same thing for nonfiction. You got to give these in, and what happens is the acquisitions editor will then take it. If the acquisitions editor likes it, he or she becomes your salesperson, then takes it to the pub board. I've always liked the phrase "the pub board." I see a bunch of people sitting around with beer steins, singing German drinking songs, and but it goes to the pub board, and they will use your proposal to sell the idea, and all of the people there will have them, and they'll go over them and talk about the good and the bad, and then things go well, they'll end up offering a contract or at least asking for more information. So I've been working on my next proposal, and for a little behind the scenes, I hate proposals.
Oh, they're a pain.
But it's
Aren't
part
they?
of the process.
Yeah, they're a pain. We could probably do an entire episode on how to put together a proposal.
We should do that.
We should probably put that on our list of things to do. I'm sure there are several people out there who could benefit from that, myself included in that. I've done several proposals. I'm not sure any of them have been good. I've landed a couple contracts, but still out there. I just did a proposal a couple months ago that I sent out, and just heard back from a publisher today that seems interested. So that's encouraging. That's not a contract, but it is encouraging that at least the proposal was sharp enough to catch one editor's eye. And I do like the pub board idea as well. I want to start my own publishing company just so we could have meetings at the pub to talk about publication.
An Irish pub.
An Irish pub, yeah.
Book proposals always look better after the third beer.
Yeah. Maybe we could take this one. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So, no, good times. All right, well, a little something different. Those of you who saw announcements on Facebook and the like and read descriptions of this cast saw that I teased a little bit of a book giveaway, but I'm not saying which book, or at least I didn't, and now I think I will say which book. Pops, you're talking about maybe giving away at least one copy of your latest novel, Wounds. Is that correct?
Yep, happy to do that.
Yeah, is it going to be a signed copy?
I will sign it, and with an autograph, you can get 50 cents more at a garage sale. So,
and that's an important 50 cents.
That's an important 50 cents. So.
That's the difference between $1 and $1.50. I'm not good with math, but I'm pretty sure the numbers work out. So, and the cool thing is, you're planning on giving this away to one of our viewers, our live viewers tonight. See, it pays to tune in, guys. And
if we can find someone that's the least bit interested in having one,
yeah,
doorstop or something. So.
Well, I didn't want to be outdone, so I've decided to give away a copy of The Bargain as well. And if all goes well, you'll end up getting a copy of The Bargain, and I'll end up getting a copy of Wounds. And, we'll just make sure it's random, finger quotes. So, but yeah, we are not going to do that now. I'm gonna play a little game with mine. I am going to give away a copy of The Bargain, a print copy signed by me, to whomever can comment and tell me which Marvel character appears on the water glass from which I am drinking tonight. The game is afoot. And how can they get a copy of yours, Pops?
Well, I was just thinking about that. Every time you lift that glass, I'm going to start speaking, so the thing will switch to me and they can't see it. But that would be cruel. You're an evil man. The best thing to do, if you want to get a copy of Wounds, I need to get your address. And we're becoming very sensitive about trying to protect people's email addresses, since I get about 60 spams a day now. So the thing to do would be go to my website, altongansky.com, and you'll find a contact in there. It'll be a link. You click on it, and then you'll have my email address and the like. So no problem with that. If you do that and give me your physical mailing address, I will send a book once we get it all settled here. Oh,
likewise. And what did you get?
Molly has already jumped on yours.
Yeah,
she has an answer.
Well, I think. Oh, does she? It hasn't popped up on my screen. So, is it the correct answer?
It is. It is the correct answer.
Oh, but Molly, you don't. Well, I was going to say Molly doesn't count. Of course she counts, but you already have a copy of The Bargain, I believe. So maybe we can share the love here. I don't know. We'll work something out. I'm sure. Maybe I can give her a copy of one of my books that she doesn't currently own. So, we can do that. We'll work that out. Well, should we move into our topic for the night?
We should.
Wasted enough time here, so actually get to some teaching. Talking info dumps tonight, popular term you hear thrown around the business, obviously short for information dumps. Pops, why don't you tell us a little bit about what an information dump is?
Well, the way we're using the term tonight is to describe what we often see with new writers, and that is they give us all this information right up front. I'm sorry, I just paused. I think she gave the right answer. Did you change glasses?
No, but I wish I had. That's fantastic.
Okay, yeah, just threw me off there. An info dump is where a writer is worried that the reader's not going to get it all, and so they just upload everything up front, and it can be a real problem in the writing. And by that I mean, for example, character descriptions. We'll get a little more into that, but character descriptions is one of the most overused info dumps, and the real problem is this: it's the writer either lacks confidence in their writing, or they lack confidence in the reader, and they think that if I don't tell them everything in chapter 1 about this individual, they won't know what's going on. Well, it's our job as writers to make sure they stay engaged from beginning to end. And the problem with the info dump is it leads to a lot of telling instead of showing. It leads to a lot of bogging down. One of my favorite comments is your story starts off slow, then it bogs down from there, which was what happens with info dumps.
You know, some important notes here. They tend to be, information dumps tend to be a little more acceptable in some genre fiction, specifically in fantasy and sci-fi. Fantasy readers love fantasy worlds. They want to know the entire history of whatever world you've created. So they're usually a little more patient in that regard. But if you're reading a thriller, your readers are not going to be as patient in trying to figure out the entire backstory of characters. I think another problem with info dumps, or another reason, another place from which they stem, is when, at least for me, I end up getting drawn into information dumps when I'm trying to discover who my characters are. And so I'm doing some more exploratory types of writing. And so I'm trying to find the reason why this character is behaving in a certain way. And before I know it, I've launched into this 3 or 4 page info dump, which is important for me to write so that I can understand my character. But it's also important for me to cut, because my reader doesn't need to know all of that. They don't need to know when my character was born, or where they were born, or what their favorite movie is. But it really helps if I, as the author, know that, because then I can start trying to reveal some of this information in a timely fashion, not all at once, but they're breadcrumbs, aren't they? They're like breadcrumbs on the trail, trying to lead us to maybe back to safety rather than leading us to the witch's house in the woods. But breadcrumbs that we pick up as we go, they're like hints, or at least they should be.
Yeah, I agree. I just finished a nonfiction set of lessons I was asked to write, and on writing a nonfiction book, and I used the ladder as an illustration. My mic is going crazy here. I messed something up. Anyway, I used the ladder as an illustration of moving from rung to rung, and it's the same thing in fiction. You reveal something, the reader gets that, a little later you reveal a little bit more, later a little bit more, later a little bit more, and then the reader begins to develop a picture. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and you do that one piece at a time. You don't take the whole thing and try to just spread it out and have it all work. It's not going to do that. You have to lay down piece after piece after piece. And so it's like the rungs to a ladder. You want to get from the ground, that span from the ground to the roof, then you need a ladder, and the ladder has rungs, and each one of those is what enables you to scale up to the roof. And same thing in writing. It's what allows your reader to get from point A to point Z at the end of the book without first having to wade through 2 or 3 chapters of information.
Right. I want to mention a couple things. The first thing is that Molly was incorrect. She gave the incorrect answer, and so the prize is still available, everybody, and I might get thirsty here in a minute or two. But the info dumps, yeah, it's I forgot the second thing that I was going to say. Now that makes me sad. Talking about info dumps.
Well, spanning the distance, getting you said
the jigsaw
breadcrumbs.
puzzle. Yeah, the jigsaw puzzle. I like that idea, and I've always used that kind of idea myself. That same analogy. It would be an information dump is the rough equivalent of giving a puzzle. Somebody who really loves puzzles, my grandfather loved jigsaw puzzles. If I gave him a fully assembled jigsaw puzzle, it would be pointless, right? The point is to go through the process of putting the pieces together and twisting them around and seeing which ones match with which ones, and there's a certain satisfaction for the puzzle assembling audience that they like to put these things together. And nobody's gonna buy, I mean, if they wanted the picture assembled, they would have just bought the poster and put it up on their wall, but they wanted to put it together. They wanted that activity. They wanted that mental stimulation. And that's really what reading should be. It should stimulate that same part of the brain where we're getting some pieces to the puzzle, we're putting together the larger picture, and then when we get it all done and we can see the entire landscape, there's that feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction that goes along with it. And info dumps really kind of rob the reader of that opportunity. And so you want to space that stuff out. Yeah, you want to space that stuff out. Other ways that we see info dumps would be in dialogue, and I find these to be particularly egregious. This is when characters tell each other things that they already know. I always use the example in my classes of somebody coming up, some guy coming up saying, "Hey, how's your mom who's dying of stage 4 breast cancer?" What? What? No, like nobody says that. Those people have no friends. But the reason the writer has done that is because they want to get that information to the reader, and they don't know how else to do it, so they stick it into dialogue. So those kinds of info dumps will crop up a lot in dialogue. You got to be really careful about that. Instead, you want to trim the dialogue as much as possible, and just through little clues and hints, somebody might say, "How's your mom feeling?" And then if somebody else replies with, "Chemo's really, really hurting right now," then we know enough. We don't know everything, but we know enough, and that keeps the story moving forward. It doesn't insult our readers, and it doesn't deprive them of that opportunity to start putting those pieces together.
A few things are worse than bad dialogue. You and I were just chatting about old comic books back in the 60s, and the dialogue is just absolutely horrible in them. And that's what they do, is they explain everything through dialogue. Even though they're showing it in a comic book, I mean, they give you a visual, and then they're showing it. It's Thor who's swinging his hammer because he's going to leave, and he says, "It's time for me to part. Stand back, I'm swinging my hammer." Well, I kind of got that from the picture. But that is just a fear that the reader is not going to understand what's going on, and we have to give the reader a little more credit. And you make a very good point about not doing that in dialogue, because there is a tendency to use dialogue to convey information, behind-the-scenes information, and that's generally the wrong way to do it.
I agree. I'm a huge fan of the series Lost. Episode 1 was fantastic, or sorry, season 1 was fantastic. Season 2 and 3 not as strong. It kind of went downhill. I think it was season 4 with the writer's strike. The Hollywood writer's strike hit, and you could tell. And there was a scene in Lost where a character gets shot and she's dying, and she says on the phone, "Tell my sister I love her." So it's pretty fantastically awful acting to begin with, and I thought, well, that's just the cheesiest line I've ever heard. Like, that's just amateurish. And then like 2 episodes later, you get somebody parachuting onto the island holding somebody at gunpoint saying, "Oh, you killed this character, and she called me right before she died, and she said, 'Tell my sister I love her,' but she doesn't have a sister. That was our secret code word that really meant that somebody killed me, and you need to come down here and kill people." It's like, oh, okay, like, really? This is in dialogue? You tell this to the guy before you shoot him, like we're monologuing in The Incredibles again? It just, it really breaks. You know what it is it breaks the fictive dream. It reminds the reader that they're reading a story rather than experiencing something on their own. And anything that's going to call attention to the fact that the reader's reading a book, it's really going to kind of break that fictive dream, and it's unsatisfying as a reader.
And what the reader will do is just say, who talks like that? The goal is to always have natural, as much as possible, natural dialogue. And that's sometimes difficult to do because you're putting it on a page. So you can't always get the accent stuff just right. But still, there's certain patterns of speech that will tell us a great deal. But you want that dialogue to be natural. And this is really where patience pays off. I also think it's where people like me who are generally intuitive writers have an advantage. We can't upload all that stuff because we don't know.
Right.
We don't know that information, so we're finding it out as we go along. So I've never had much of a problem doing the info dump, just because I just didn't know while I was walking through all of this. I was figuring it out as I went, and that sometimes would surprise me. I didn't know that about the character, and that made it much more fun to write, and then I think it worked out better for the reader also.
Yeah, but I do think we have to be cautious as discovery writers as well, because at least in my experience, when I'm writing as a discovery writer and I figure out my character, then I end up doing the info dump right then and there. It's like, oh, that's what happened, and I'll tell the whole story, and it's usually one person saying to another person, this is my whole backstory, and then it's very info dumpy. And again, it's something I do to figure out my characters myself, but something I've got to go back and trim up. Just real quick on that note of trimming up, I think good dialogue really is the formula for good dialogue is 100% of what you write in dialogue minus 50%. Cut back whatever you originally write by 50%, and your dialogue's going to be a lot stronger. Cut wherever you can. Leave some of those mysteries alive. Leave them, leave those breadcrumbs out there. But you definitely want to pull pieces off the loaf. You don't want to give them the entire loaf. I feel like I'm stretching this analogy too far now.
Yeah, it's Al's axiom number 2. Writing is putting words on the page. Great writing is taking words off the page, and that's where the real magic happens. And that would be one of the things I would counsel people against, and that is worrying about this too much. If you're writing along and you do one of these info dumps, you give us a page and a half of physical description and why the person has a scar over their left eyebrow and those kinds of things. Just go ahead and do it. When you come back to edit it, you will see it as what it is, just a big block of information being force-fed to the reader. And you can take bits and pieces out and then spread it out throughout the book. So the key is not to get bound up early and not be able to get the writing done. Really, that first draft is you getting the story down. The second draft is you going back and being a professional writer and making it a whole lot better. We had Angie Hunt on a while back, and she used to do this, and my guess is she still does it. She knows where she wants to go, and she just writes like crazy. She gets about 75% of the book done in very short order, and she knows it's not a complete book, but that wasn't her goal. Her goal was to get the major story down. Then she would go back and rework things. Take out excessive information, put in necessary information, shuffle things around, and after the second draft, then she had the book that she wanted.
Yeah. I operate in much the same way, though I don't know that I'm as quick as her in turning around draft 1, but draft 1 for me is that process of discovery that the readers also go on, and then draft 2 is making sure that the information comes out at the right places and the right times. Interestingly enough, there was an article written, I can't remember where, it bothers me now, but it was on some fantasy website. It said, rules that we wish more writers would break, and one of them is to avoid info dumps. And so they were actually encouraging writers to break this rule and to include info dumps. But again, for genre fiction, I just want to put that out there, for science fiction and for fantasy, because what you'll see there is info dumps not just about characters but also about the world itself. If you watch The Fellowship of the Rings, the first 10 minutes of that movie is info dump, right? What is it? There were 9 rings and 7 were given to the dwarves, or no, 7 to win, and 9 to men, 7 to dwarves, something. There were rings, and there were dwarves, and there were elves, and people got them, and all of this. And the first 10 minutes is just explaining all this backstory so that when that ring shows up, we understand it. But then Gandalf starts talking about it to Frodo and explaining to Frodo what it is. Well, we already know because you just spent the first 10 minutes telling us. And then, Gandalf says it to somebody else, and then Frodo says it to somebody else, and it's like, if we had cut those first 10 minutes, we would have lost a lot of really cool visual effects, but we would not have lost any story. The story still would have come naturally through the progression of the film. And of course, Tolkien's writing in a completely different time. I'm not saying that Tolkien is a terrible writer or that he should have done it differently, but the way that the film was portrayed is very much how the book is portrayed as well. The prologue gives the entire backstory of the world so that you understand where you are in the Shire and what's on the line, etc. So you can do these info dumps for characters, but another place that you need to watch out for them, especially in genre fiction, is when you're doing these, when you're explaining the setting and setting that up. It's another place.
Well, you're absolutely right about the genre thing. Of course, Tolkien was writing at a different time, and it doesn't really matter when he's writing, it matters when he learned to write, and so it goes back even further. And so this was a bit of a trend. It's the way people were taught to write. We're going to talk about Arthur C. Clarke and Michener in a little bit, and because they just blow this out of the water. Mm-hmm. They do everything we're saying not to do. But to be fair, all those books are much older, and the people writing them were fairly old at the time they were writing them. So there's some habits that come from an earlier time. And the other way to think of this, of course, is some of the details. Take it to Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy, the joke was he'd tell you how many rivets were in an F-22 fighter jet. But that's because the readers wanted that. That particular brand of military fiction, they wanted to know all those details. Those who read the Civil War fiction and nonfiction, they want as much detail as possible. So it's a specialized genre, but in general, you want to spread out everything as much as possible with that. And as you mentioned, in the setting of description, the description it needs to be there. You have to set a stage for the actors to work on, but sometimes we put so much up front that we lose the actors. It takes too long to get to first piece of dialogue. And now I'm going to use James Michener's Hawaii as an example. It starts millions and millions of years ago. Okay. So before he gets to the modern story, he takes us back in time, and he walks us through the development of the continents and how Hawaii got there and what happened to the oceans and how the first animals got there. And he runs us through this whole long thing before he gets really to the story that most of us think we're getting when we buy the book. But it's a different kind of book, and his writing is so strong that he can pull it off. Arthur C. Clarke does it in Rendezvous with Rama and other books, because this is how they were taught to do this. So there's just a lot of upfront, and this does happen in science fiction because you have to create a world. The reader has no idea what the world is like. So to create a world and some of the events that set the stage for what's about to happen, he goes into long narration. He's just known for a lot of narration in there. Most of us can't pull that off. Most modern publishers don't like it. And so we are talking about what's going on today, not necessarily what's going on in the past.
Right, and again, with the fantasy and sci-fi genre, since the setting is so foreign to anything that the reader has experienced, sometimes they need a little more information up front. But I find, again, it kind of goes back to that old adage, trust the reader. The reader's going to pick up on it. If you think about, Kurt Vonnegut's rules, essentially, in late, out early, just jump right in. We'll figure out the world as we go. If your elves and your dwarves hate each other, we'll figure that out when we see them on the same page. We don't need to be told about it, hundreds of pages before they actually meet. Our readership these days, I feel, is perhaps a little more impatient. Again, it's a kind of a sweeping generalization, but we do have some impatient readers, and we're seeing a lot more people not finishing a book. They'll pick it up, they'll read the first few chapters. If their interest isn't held, they're on to the next book. And so the way that you can kind of avoid that is to spread that information out, including things about setting. Find the natural place to put it in when that information is necessary. It's delivered to a character who's unfamiliar with why things work the way they do, or it is instead shown rather than told. Again, we could know all about, this family stole this particular heirloom from that family, and so, they hate each other now. The Montagues and the Capulets hate each other. Or it's just easy, while they're sword fighting, somebody says, your family has always been thieves, or you're a family of thieves, or something like that. We get the point. Okay, so you're upset because they took something that belonged to you. We don't, again, need to know the exact detail. We'll figure that out later, possibly, if it's relevant. And if it's not, we don't need to know. We just need to know these two people hate each other, they're going to sword fight. Let's go.
Right, and that's you want to get into the showing instead of the telling. And as you stretch that out bit by bit, pearls on a necklace kind of thing, bit by bit, then the reader will enjoy the process more. They'll be much more involved. As you said, they want to be involved in this. They don't want to be force-fed. They want to discover as things go along. And so there's yet another one. Have you ever read anything any book or manuscript, since you're doing some acquisitions work, have you ever read a manuscript that gives a ton of unneeded information?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. It's actually very common, again, kind of going into the history of a character or the history of a setting or the description of a particular machine. Some of it's fascinating, but a lot of it is not nearly as fascinating to me as it probably is to you, the writer. You want to keep that in mind. We're writing for an audience. We're not writing for ourselves specifically. So what is it that the reader is going to want to see? They may like the setting. They may want to see more of the setting. That may be why they bought the book, but they may not be as interested in the history of this particular location. They just want to see what it's like right now. They like the volcanoes in Hawaii. They don't need to know how they formed millions of years ago. They just need to know that it's going to blow its top. And there's a couple people on the island that might lose their lives. So that's that immediate conflict. I think that's one of the other things about info dumps is there seems to be a significant lack of conflict in them. There's no real tension because we're just telling. And so when you're just telling, there's no conflict, there's no tension, there's no emotional resonance. It's like a school lecture. And I've bored enough students and put enough students to sleep to know that they just don't care sometimes about what I have to say about the particular history of this or that. They just want to know what's gonna how are they gonna pass the class? What do they need to know to get by? Readers just want to know what they have to understand in order for the story to make sense. Some of the others information, it's nice, it's bells and whistles, that's okay, but you can definitely load down the cart. I use the example, it's something I heard from Brett Anthony Johnston, and he says something to the effect of these details that we put into our books are like rocks. If you imagine the reader as somebody going on a hike, and they see a detail, some bit of information about the story world or the character or the history, it's like a little shiny rock that catches the interest of the reader, and they go, that's pretty, I'm going to put that in my backpack. And so they start putting all these in the backpack, putting all these in the backpack. And if they just come across a huge pile of rocks, they're probably not going to put the whole thing in their backpack. It's going to break their backs, number one. So that's why info dumps are bad. Number two, it's possible to do the controlled burn info dump where you're still putting in way too much information but spreading it out to the point where I get to the end of the novel and my back is sore because I've been carrying all these rocks and I start looking at them again. Why was this important? Why was this important? Why was this important? If I'm carrying a rock for any number of pages, it should pay out at the end. I should pick it up at the end and go, that's why I picked up this rock. It's so beautiful and it makes everything fit together. Otherwise, you're making us making the readers do unnecessary work. And so think of that, like how much information do they really need? How many rocks do they need to put in their backpack? And do I have just an entire stack of rocks, a pile of rocks here? Is there a way to kind of distribute that so they're not carrying it all at one time?
Yes. We do tend to overburden the reader. But one of the things I want to say, and somebody had wrote this in the chat room, I want to make sure that we're not being misunderstood here. We're not saying there shouldn't be a lot of detail, a lot of information. What we're saying is you shouldn't condense it all into one place. That just because your character walks in the scene, we don't need a laundry list of he's this tall, he weighs this much, his eyes are this color, this is the clothes he likes to wear, and he keeps his closet perfectly organized. We don't need that all up front. We need enough to get an image, and then we learn the rest as we go through. So if we see him in his house and he opens his closet and everything's perfectly organized, we now know that's what he does. So we're not saying that there shouldn't be plenty of detail. What we're saying is you don't want to feed somebody with a shovel. Okay, you give them a fork or a spoon, but you're not going to feed them with a shovel. Give it bits and pieces so that can be processed, and the reader can move along, and they will start looking for more information. And that is part of the reading process, and part of the joy is learning these things as time goes on, as the story develops, and then the reader starts going, okay, now I get it. I see why that's there. And it begins to make a difference in their understanding of the story.
Yeah, I like the way Bethany Kaczmarek says it here in the room. She says, I want to know enough that I'm desperately curious. And I like that. You want to give them information to make them curious. You don't want to answer all their questions right away, because if you do, they have nothing left to read for, right? So give them enough to make your reader curious. And don't give them enough to completely satisfy their appetite. Don't feed them with a shovel. Like you say, I like that analogy, by the way. That's a great image. Now I kind of want to feed somebody with a shovel. That makes me a bad person, maybe, but yeah.
You're an evil man.
I really am, and I think that's perhaps the least evil thing that I've said today. So, oh my goodness. So
going back to your classroom illustration, there's a difference between lecture and lab, and that's the reason in science why they do that. You learn more by doing than you do by just sitting in a classroom and having somebody pour information into your ears. So like in a chemistry class, you learn some terms, but then when you go to the lab, you see those terms in action, and you're using them, and then it becomes much more real, and it sticks with you a whole bunch longer. Same thing, I think, for the reader. Once they start investing in figuring some of this out, they will stay with you. If you answer all the questions up front, they have no reason to stay with you. They figure the good guy's going to win, and they move on. So you want to keep it interesting, and the way you do that is you deprive the reader of need-to-know information up front, but you do provide it as the story goes along, and they begin to build the world that way.
I like that, the need to know information. A lot of times information dumps happen because there's a lot of things that readers don't need to know, but the writers want them to know. It's need to know, not want to know. That's a good way to think about it. We can talk about Anton Chekhov's gun over the mantelpiece, and the idea that if you give a detail about that gun over the mantle, at some point it needs to come off the mantle, right? Somebody needs to shoot that gun. So you can ask yourself, as you're writing and including these details, are these Chekhov's guns? Are they going to go off at some point? Are these details going to be relevant to the story? Because if not, then I need to take them off the mantle, and this is something that the reader does not need to see, because what will happen is then the reader will then expect something that you don't deliver on, and that can lead to an unsatisfied reader. So need to know information, not want to know. Well said.
Yeah, movies have a problem with this because it's, of course, very visual, hence movies. But you will see this, that they'll do an establishing shot. Like you're watching television, you watch the X-Files. When in the FBI building, the first thing you see is a corner shot of the external shot of the FBI building, and now you know that's where they are. And there's no explanation. It just shows it. And so there's enough information giving to the viewer that they can figure that out. But then at times there'll be something let's keep the gun motif going here. the camera will flash onto a gun that's in a drawer and then, or on a tabletop or something, and then shoot off to something else. No pun intended there. We'll move on to something else and begin to see what the other characters are doing. And the joke at my house is I always say, yeah, we'll see that gun again, or we'll see that knife again, or we'll see that car again. It's because they've telegraphed it to us. And they really have no other way of doing it. Otherwise, the gun appears out of nowhere. So it's giving information at the proper time. They don't show that in Scene 1, Act 1. They may show that shortly before it's needed. And that way we're able to track with it instead of spending 35 minutes of a 44-minute show going, why did they show us that gun? Where'd the gun go? And then you start losing the reader.
Or, like you say, if they're in the FBI building, you know, the info dump is, you know, Bob pulled up to the FBI building in Langley, Virginia, in this kind of a car. Then he had just put gas in it 28 miles before, and so his gas tank was at 3/4 full, and he liked how much gas mileage he was getting, and blah, 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 blah. And at some point, it's like, just go in the building and shoot someone, or go in the building and talk to the director. Whatever it is, I don't even need you pulling up. Just, why are we starting with you getting out of the car? Why aren't we already in the office? How they got there is really irrelevant. What is relevant is what's going to happen within there. I'm now looking at all the guesses about my wonderful drinking glass, and everybody's wrong, and I'm all out of water. Me, right here, completely out of water.
You're going to have to hold it still.
Is it that bad?
It's a stark-looking glass.
I caught your joke there.
It's a stark-looking glass, yeah. Well, they'll iron it out later.
Okay. I can't come up with a pun. It must be Wednesday night. My brain is slow. No, so
don't worry about it. I've given enough bad puns.
Yeah. They were good puns.
Well, the unneeded information is something to avoid, and what we tend to do as writers is we sometimes bring in characters we think are going to be important, and it turns out they're not, but we leave them in. And that's an unresolved issue in the book. Take them out. Or you set a scene someplace, and the scene isn't important, the setting isn't important, and that you need to take it out. Now, I've seen all the things come in about the glass. I think you've hamstrung us here with that.
I apologize, but it is
fun. A scene has to do one of three things. It either has to advance the story, it has to define the character, or it has to set up some action that's about to happen. It has to do one of those three things. If your scene does not do that, doesn't establish something about the characters, doesn't set up something that's about to happen, doesn't move things forward, then you cut it. You take it out. Otherwise, you're just padding the book. You're just trying to get pages done. And if you don't take it out, then when it goes to edit, somebody will ask you to take it out. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to be doing it one way or the other.
Yeah. We get a lot of loose threads this way, too, especially when you do an info dump right at the front. And you put in there everything that you plan to write. And then in the process of writing the book, you figure out that you don't want to write all of that. And so you drop some stuff. And then what you have are these loose ends, these story threads that are just kind of dangling, flapping in the wind, and completely unresolved. And so you have a couple options. At the end, you can do another info dump to try and tie everything together, which is just as unsatisfying. Or you can go back through and pull those threads out and leave whatever story you've woven together as is. Which is probably our better option. So it's another thing to watch out with info dumps is the loose strands here that kind of come from them as well. So
now I'm the one that's lost this train of thought. It's been a long day.
Yeah, you're old though, so we can just kind of chalk it.
I'm about to get older. Yeah, I'm about to get older in 2 days here. I will be officially old. And I started feeling it early on, so that's kind of the way it is. If there is a need to do an info dump that is a need on part of the writer, they don't feel like they've got to get this out and they've got to get it out now. One of two things: go ahead and put it in your first draft. Just know you're going to change it later, and maybe set the font to a different color, or highlight it, or something, just so you don't forget and you come back to it. The other thing writers do is on the notebook that they're keeping, their digital notebook. They just do that info dump right there, and they don't put it in the book. They do it for themselves, and they get all the details. Some people get very elaborate with characters, for example. Some get very elaborate with settings. You're mentioning Tolkien and stuff, and there's maps involved in special language, and all of that had to be compiled in a separate area before you could put it into a book. So you can do that and get that information out. Just don't leave it in the manuscript you turn in. Don't leave it in that position. Make sure that the prose flows from beginning to end, and always leave just a little bit of mystery so the reader stays engaged.
Absolutely. I lost my train of thought because I just got all those notes about the about the class. They just all came in, and Tess is talking about my magnetic personality, and oh my goodness. So, but yeah, I feel like we've covered the topic fairly well. I like what you say, putting things in the notebook. Whenever I write something that's as a discovery writer that I know is going to be important later on that I may need to use, I'll put a comment on it, or I'll put it into my story notebook in my little research binder, so that when I need it, I can come back to it. What is it? What is that plant I said that healed people, and I can go back and find it, or who is that character who said this? I can go back and find it.
Sure.
That accomplishes a couple things, namely, it keeps me from having to do the info dumps right up front, and it also helps me kind of pull those story threads throughout, weave them throughout the rest of the story, so that they're not just kind of dangling loose threads on their own. So,
yeah, Tess says something that's interesting, and I want to comment on it. She says it works if you give the reader the needed info. One of the things that drives me nuts about Miss Marple, Agatha Christie's character, she always has some bit of important info needed to solve the mystery that isn't shared. Yeah, and that is, I think, a break of trust. It's a breach of trust with the reader. You must, especially in mysteries, you must give them all the information necessary to solve the crime. Not up front, but by the time you get to the very end, you're in Act 3, and you're closing in on things, then that information needs to come forward so the reader has a chance to solve it. That's really what they're after. And they feel very good when they do. That doesn't mean you make it easy for them, but you don't withhold key information, because the reader has need to know information. And so you give them it at the right time. That's really what we're talking about, is spreading out the information and putting bits of information at the right place at the right time in the story.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's very frustrating as a reader to have information deliberately withheld from you. There's a few things that are more frustrating than that, namely bad dialogue. But it's bad. It's bad. So you make a good point there about giving the need to know information when it's needed. Yeah.
Well, I think now is time to give out another piece of information.
Okay.
Did it get it right on your glass? Tess is saying, so is it Iron Man?
Yes, it is Iron Man. I think that Bethany was the first, other than Molly Jo. Molly Jo says, I knew it was Iron Man, though I don't know if I can trust that. So Bethany then says, at least on my feed, it shows that Bethany got it next. Says, oh, could it be Iron Man? So that's what Tess was too busy writing intelligent comments to say Iron Man right away. So hers came in a little bit later. So
wait a minute, Bethany says, and you got to look at the spelling. So our audio folks aren't going to get this, and I guess our video folks don't get it either. Ferris Bueller for Iron Man. Ferris, is that a play on words? Is that an intentional pun there, Bethany? That Ferris meaning as in Iron Bueller?
I'm sure that's exactly what it is.
Or did the editor misspell Ferris?
See, that was the thing. I was like, I don't think she spelled Ferris right, and then I realized, oh, it's a smarter joke. I'm just not smart enough for her joke, is what it boils down to. So yeah, absolutely, great stuff, man. That was kind of fun. So I'll be in touch with Bethany about how to get her my signed copy of The Bargain. And how did you want to handle wounds, Pops?
Well, we'll repeat what we said at the top of the program, since we had a few folks that had been delayed. Just go to my website, altongansky.com. This is not a cheap effort to run up the numbers, but I'm trying to protect my email since I've just been slammed with stuff. If you go there, you can find a contact link and just send me your physical mailing address, and I will send you a copy of Wounds. I will even sign it, and as I said earlier, that gets you 50 cents more at a garage sale. So, but to do that, go there if you have any problem. Contact Aaron, and you'll
blame it on me. It's my turn to be the scapegoat. So
yeah, you can find me. You can find me on Google, Google Plus too, I guess. So you could do it that way.
Yeah,
any of
absolutely.
social media.
Yeah, and so they can reach you at altongansky.com, and you guys can reach me at aarongansky.com. Before we sign off, Pops, any last words before we sign out?
No, been working on a proposal all day, so I am brain dead. My just numb as can be with that. So no, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I love the people that are showing up and giving us all the witty things like Tess talking about Iron Man having a magnetic personality and other such things. Love that kind of humor. So
Yeah,
it's fun to be here. If you still interested in those little novella as opposed to a big novella. If you're interested in novellas I'm doing with Bill Myers, Frank Peretti, and Angela Hunt, know that Frank Peretti's comes out on March 1st. So you're just a few days away from being able to get that. And those of you that are not watching live, it's probably already available. So March 1st, and you can get that. Of course, Bill's will still be available too.
Yeah. We do appreciate you guys listening, especially listening live and contributing to the discussion. It's always fun. And go ahead and subscribe on iTunes, on YouTube, all that good stuff. Leave us some comments, some thumbs up, and tell some friends. See if you got some friends that would like to tune in. That'd be helpful and nice, and we could all appreciate the discussion together. So. Until next week, you know what we didn't talk about is we didn't talk about what we're covering next week. Next week we will be covering Intuitive Writers versus Outliners. Which will always be fun. So,
and we can also talk about the process of outlining and the process of being intuitive, how to make it work for you.
Yeah, that'd be good. Maybe we can get an outliner because I'm definitely not an outliner. So.
Yeah, I've done both, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. It really has to do with the way your brain is wired. Most people don't know which they are till they've tried both of them, then they get a feel for it. But we'll go into detail on that. Tricks that intuitive writers use, also known as discovery writers, tricks that outliners use. My only criteria is you don't call it seat of the pants writing.
Right. Okay. So I'm not alone in that boat.
No, that's offensive for us people who are intuitive writers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even write with pants on, so.
Exactly.
Wait, it just got weird, didn't it? Oh, okay. Over.
Yeah.
See,
say goodnight, Aaron.
Info dump. Not needed information. Now fed you with a shovel. So, well, thank you all for listening. Appreciate you tuning in, and until next week, good writing.